Most artists will tell you that there were a few big aha moments. Something that was so profound and so beneficial to your work that your paintings were better after you learned that. Well, today that's what I'm going to be sharing with you. The process of painting in layers to create vibrant light within your paintings. And I'm going to share with you these key insights as we go from the beginning to the end of this painting process. I always start with my drawing first, and I wanted to include a couple figures in the scene. And so the first thing I'm doing is laying in my drawing, and then I'm wetting down the back of my paper and the front of my paper. And once both sides are damp, I lay it on my surface, and I'm going to start with the lightest values first. And so that's what's important here is when we're thinking in layers. Your first layer is going to be all the lightest values of your scene. So when you look at your painting, everything that's in light. And in this scene, it's going to be the sky, it's going to be the face of this house here, it's going to be the areas that are on the street that are in light. And so in the first phase, that's all you need to think about is what's going on in the light part of the scene. Let me talk you through what I've done here so far. I painted the light of the house. I laid in the sky wash. This right here is raw sienna with a little bit of cadmium yellow, medium hue. Within this first wash, when we're painting wet and wet, I like to let the colors just softly blend on the paper. And down here I have a little bit of green, that's some Cobalt Teal Blue. And I'm going around the scene thinking about all the lit up areas of the painting and painting that in a nice wet and wet wash. And I wanted to include some soft glowing greens up where some of those trees were catching the light. And for that, I'm using some raw sienna and some Cobalt Turquoise for my green color. And where I want more vibrant green, I'm laying in some cadmium yellow. And as I work down the scene, this is still within my light values. And I knew that I wanted to include these figures, but I'm painting around them a little bit for now. And I'm going to come back to them in just a minute and drop in some light values for them as well. But I wanted to focus on the color here of the grass and just to continue on from this wet edge to create the light in this scene. And one thing I like about painting in this way is really letting the colors fuzz and blend together on the paper. In this first wash, things are a lot looser. It's okay if colors are flowing one into another and everything is loose and we're not getting a lot of clear, solid definition from one object to the next. But all of that definition will come later on in the process, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The temptation when you're painting this first wash is to go too weak. You're thinking that this is in light, and for some reason in watercolor, when I was first getting started and I was thinking painting the lights, I just needed a really thin kind of wash that's mostly water with just a touch of paint. But you can see I'm going very strong on this first wash. I had to push the value of the sky to show a little bit of difference between the face of this and the value of the sky. I want a good balance in values, so I didn't want to go too weak in this first wash. Use a little more paint than you think you're going to need, because what happens is when we've wet the paint down and we're using a brush with a lot of water and paint on it, when this paper dries, the values are going to fade a little bit. So we want to compensate for that and try to not paint too light within your first wash. And while it's still damp, I was dropping in a few little darks that just kind of fuzzed into this wash. But here is a look at the first layer of my painting. It's a nice wet into wet wash that covers all of the paper, minus this. I wanted the light kind of really hitting that shed back there, so I didn't paint the face of that. But everything else other than a few little marks are covered up in this first wash. And now we have our first layer in place. The next layer is the middle value connected shape of the scene. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, once the painting has dried, I'm coming over here at the left and I'm working with some raw sienna and some Cobalt Turquoise. And now that I've laid that soft side of the tree, I'm coming back in with more paint and painting the shadow side of the tree. And what that does is it creates a nice light effect. You have the soft lit up area and then the more defined darker area, and when you combine those two, you do get a nice feeling of light on the side of that tree. Now, the name of the game in this second layer is connections. We're always looking at connections. And I get a lot of students that ask about, well, why is it so important to connect things? When you paint in a large connected way, and you're always looking for ways to connect the shape into the other shape, you are left with this large, big, connected shape. This is where we're heading in this wash, and I'll back this up in a minute. But see how powerful that is laid over the top of the lighter wash? When those two washes are working together, the light side and the shadow side, the light is already becoming very evident and strong, and this is just the middle values. We don't have the darks in yet. So that's where we're headed. I'm going to back this up and show you step by step how I create this large connected wash. So it's helpful to squint at your reference photo and work from left to right if you're right-handed, but just pick a path, right? Pick a path and try to always reload your brush and come back to a wet edge. So come back to where you left off and look for that connection in your scene. So I'm starting over there with the left in that tree, moving right into the value of the house, the top of the roof, right into the shadow side of the house. And a nice way about painting like this too is you get those nice connections of color that just fade from one to another. This nice soft edge between the green and the roof here, the coolness and a little bit of the warmth. And that's one thing that's great about watercolor that we really want to kind of lean into, is letting those soft colors just flow into each other. So connecting the truck, the shadow of the truck into the shadow side of the fence, wrapping that around the light part of the building. This is raw sienna and cobalt turquoise. This is more raw umber, raw sienna with some neutral tint. Where you're seeing some coolness, that's some lavender with a touch of cobalt blue mixed in. And down here, more cerulean and cobalt teal blue here. And into here with a little more raw sienna, raw umber, back into the cooler mixture with cobalt blue and lavender. And as I get into the shadow of that's on the grass, I'm using some cobalt turquoise mixed with neutral tint. And look how crazy this figure looks. I don't want to just cut them out and make him so rigid, but see right now, it's tempting right now to feel like, oh man, I've just really messed up. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to connect the middle values into the shadow part of the figures, right? And it's okay if I lose some of that edge and some of the definition of the figure. But it's more important to me to mix in some of these colors and connect it into this wash. So with every one of these layers, you're finding ways to interlock with each other, to interlock with the first layer. That's something to keep in mind as you move through this process. So I'm connecting the figure into that wash, adding the shadow side of his clothing, some skin tone. And see, it's tempting to feel like, oh, I just really lost it. The figure's gone. Well, I'll define that figure with some more darks. So it's going to be okay. That little blob will have some more definition later on. Now I'm getting into the shadows that are sweeping across the road, and I'm connecting them right into the grass, right? Just keep connecting. And here I'm using more cobalt blue, some neutral tint, some raw sienna, a gray that lands more on the cooler side. But shadows are a good form of connector. I love scenes with shadows in them. And I'm using this to go back up into the tree, connect to the shadow side of the tree, and I can leave a little bit of the first wash behind as needed. Really using the trees and everything to define those bits of light that I laid out in my first layer of my painting. And I'm using a calligraphy brush. I like using the side of that. It can make nice broken marks for trees, or it can hold a lot of paint and make sweeping long marks for shadows. It's pretty versatile and very cheap as well. The only downside to that brush is it will leave hairs on your painting on occasion, and that does get annoying. So this is our second layer. We did the first layer laying in all the light values of the scene. Now we've done this second layer that is laying in the middle values of the scene. And so that big connected shape of the shadow, and if you squint at the scene, look at the unity that we're creating between the shapes. The tree over here, into the house, down into the shadow, all big and connected. And it's easy to see the little separate things. It's harder to see that big connected shape. That leads us to the third and the final layer of our scene. And I'll show you where we're going. We're going to get there with all the darks and bring the scene together. So I'm going to start right here with the figures. I'm going to try to bring some more definition to this figure that I just kind of blurred in as a blob into that middle value shape, and adding some legs. And here's a little tip for figures. When you get down to where their legs are touching the ground, just blur it with your finger. That little bit of blur makes the figure feel more lifelike, and it gives it a sense of motion. So I'm going to start over here with this big tree, and you can see I'm back to this calligraphy brush. Now this tree was in shadow, and I liked the feeling of the tree being in shadow compared to the other trees in light, and I thought that would give us a nice bit of contrast. So one thing I want to mention here, we talked so much about connection in the middle values. Connecting is important in the darks as well. Right here, I'm finding a way to connect the darks on the shadow of this fence into the darks of the tree wherever you can. You don't have to go out of your way to really make that happen, but the connections, even in the darks, just give a stronger feeling to your painting. And I'm doing a little bit of dry brush, some neutral tint, some raw umber, darker pigments, give this house a little bit more definition. I decided to actually cover up most of that truck. It was just getting kind of weird. I didn't like the angle of it. It was drawing too much attention over here on the side of the painting, so I just covered it up in shadow. This little line here, these little directional lines are important. It leads the viewer's eye through the scene, but it also gives a great bit of connection between the figure and whatever else is connected to the line. And so this is the phase of the painting where you just bring order, you bring organization and a little bit of separation. We worked really hard to connect our scene throughout much of the process so far. Now is when you come in with the details and give everything a little bit more polish and finish. And I thought these windows were a nice touch and necessary. The light is hitting this part of the house, and bringing a little bit of detail and dry brush will solidify this as an important area of the painting. Here I'm using some gouache. So here are how the figures looked. I wanted to add a little bit of vibrant light and a few little highlights and get that back. That's what gouache is good for. So I'm loading up some thick ivory white Holbein gouache on the tip of my brush and giving the figures just a few little highlights, bringing back some of that light that's just a little too hard to paint around. A few little details around the scene, little darks here and there, bringing a feeling of finish. And here is a look at the final painting. When you get a handle on painting in layers and understanding that your first layer is all about establishing the light values of the scene, laying in the light all over the painting. Your second layer is for laying in the middle values, and you're really looking for that large connected shape. And your third layer are the darks and the details, the little bits that bring organization and finish and polish to the scene. You can really set yourself up and create vibrant watercolors with strong and believable light. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone, you could print it out, and you can take a look at these crucial planning steps before you start each painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.